Guys, I have a problem. A pretty big problem. And I've had this problem for well over a year now, because on the 26th of September 2020, I got to experience Outer Wilds for the very first time. And ever since that day, I've wanted to make a big video on it. The problem is that's a very difficult thing to do. Everyone that's played through the Outer Wilds knows that the first rule of Outer Wilds is that you don't talk about Outer Wilds.
This game is pretty hard to explain, especially without spoiling it.
Things like the footage I'm showing behind you can't really explain the Outer Wilds without ruining it.
It's what all the reviews on YouTube say. It's what almost all the comments on those reviews say. And I honestly think that this is one of the things that has prevented the game from picking up more mainstream success, even though it has been doing very well. Outer Wilds is an amazing game, but it's only an amazing game if you go into it knowing as little as possible. How do you sell that to someone? Even on the official subreddit, it's like you get smited out of existence if you even mention so much as a minor spoiler. Hey everybody, I heard a lot of good stuff about Outer Wilds. I was wondering if you could just fill me in. What is this game about? Oh, it's a great game. It's about exploration and puzzles, and you play as this Hartian. You start on this big planet. Of course, naturally, if you tell somebody to go play a game, they want to know more about said game. They're not always just gonna trust you blindly. And that's also one of the problems. If you were to just look at this gameplay, right? If you were to just look at it.
Just look at it!
It doesn't look that special. On the surface, it looks like another low-poly, stylized walking simulator that just doesn't have a lot of substance. Right? It doesn't look that special. And there are so many bad games out there, especially in this style, especially on Steam.
I've overdosed on ketamine.
That it instantly becomes something you look at with a red flag. And I get that, right? Would you rather want this crazy over-the-top 128 people dropping into a multiplayer game action, or this? Yeah, I get it. That first thing looked a little bit more flashy. But trust me when I say that the latter one is probably going to blow your mind a little bit more. And I know just how much explosions there are in the average game of Battlefield. So why do I not want to give away any spoilers for somebody that's completely new to this game and has never heard about it? You're probably thinking, okay, so there's probably something with the story that I don't want to spoil, but it's not even that. This game is not some deeper, big think, philosophical, spiritual journey that so many indie games use as an excuse to get away with bad storytelling or just lazy lack of cutscenes, that kind of stuff. That has nothing to do with this. It is that people don't want to spoil anything because the progress you make in this game is literally tied to the knowledge about the game mechanics. I can tell you this. Outer Wilds is an open world puzzle/exploration game where you play as a dude who's ready to make his first trip into space. Other than that, this game has no specific goals for you to follow. You have no clear-cut objective. There's no underlying mission. It's just you and these different planets that you can go to, and that's it. There is one problem that is sort of in the way and preventing you from exploring everything at once, which is that every 22 minutes, the sun in the solar system goes supernova and you die. But instead of dying, you wake up at the start of the game as if nothing ever happened. I kind of hate that I have to spoil this very minimum amount just to get you into the video, just so we can get this whole thing started. But yeah, that's basically the premise of this game. No one around you seems to know that the sun went supernova. You basically went back in time. It's like a time loop game. And no one seems to remember that the day has already happened except for you. The whole solar system is a giant puzzle that needs to be solved, and knowledge about the way that things work in the solar system and in your universe is basically your progress. It's your experience bar. You figure something out on one planet, you eventually die, and now you have the knowledge to do something else on another planet. Every time you learn something new, you essentially level up and have access to a new area. Except this time, you have to figure out what to do with that information yourself to get to a new area, instead of just looking at the map and seeing an area open up because you're now level 13 instead of level 12. And that essentially means that the more I spoil about this game, the easier of a time you have at completing it. If I were to tell you all the things you could buy this game and finish it in less than 20 minutes. But of course, the rules are there to be broken, and I'm going to break the first rule of Outer Wilds today because I just got done playing the DLC that they dropped and I want to talk about it. This is my channel and I'm finally taking this DLC as the opportunity to talk about this game that I guess I passed on in the past year. Obviously, if you haven't played the game yourself yet, stop this video now, go play it yourself and then come back. Is what I would say if I was born yesterday and I didn't know anything about the internet. Like, I already know almost nobody is going to click away from this video and then buy the game and then come back to the video later just to see what I have to say about the rest of it. So here's what I'm actually gonna do to keep both ends of the spectrum sort of happy. If you haven't played the game yet, you're going to be able to treat this video like a podcast. Obviously, you'll miss out on my flashy 10 out of 10 editing skills, but I'll make an effort to not outright talk about specific solutions out loud in this video, and just mostly show the stuff on screen of what I'm talking about. So the people that have already played it, you'll be able to follow along just fine, and the people that haven't played it, you can just scroll down to the 2 comments and then just listen along. So that sounds about good? Yeah, sounds about right? Let's begin then. To start off, even though playing Echoes of the Eye sparked the creation of this video, I think it's best we look at the base game first before the DLC. As mentioned earlier, my first playthrough was over a year ago, and my first impressions were actually not that great if I'm being honest. Something that right off the bat kind of hurted the game a little bit and clearly lets you know that this is an indie title. It's the lack of voice acting. In this game, you have quite some characters that have quite some things to say. And on top of that, you also have all these scrolls that you have to read through. And you're gonna have to read through all of it. There's not one bit of voice acting. And I think this is also one of the pitfalls that the game has. Like, everybody says it's so good to go into Outer Wilds blind, but if you really have no idea what you're getting into, if you don't know that everything is a puzzle and that all this information can be vital, and you're just going to skip over some dialogue and not talk to everybody, you're not going to be as engaged and you might just end up being lost. Personally, I wasn't too bothered by it because I didn't know that it was a puzzle game going into it and that I had to pay attention to what everybody else was saying. But I do remember feeling like something was missing when I first started the game. And also the second thing, you need a controller to play it. Oh, bro. The gameplay on keyboard and mouse, not too good. So I was slightly dissatisfied at the start, but that dissatisfaction quickly went away when very early on it became clear that this was not going to be one of your typical indie games. The first hint of that was when I accidentally died to a particular type of matter I will not mention in the starting village, and instead of simply respawning, the credits started rolling. Okay then, well, thank you all for watching, guys. I initially thought this to be a hidden alternative ending joke. In the same fashion that Far Cry 4 has it, when you just sit at Pagan Mint's table and just wait for the cutscene to end. But this was of course not the case. And the moment that I realized that we're going to be playing a game that loops back in time was when I tried to exit my spaceship on my second run, trying to land on Giant's Deep and then realizing the gravity is a lot more intense on that planet. That was not that high. I'm a fucking toad. I weigh like 2 kilos. How am I dead? This is where I realized it was going to be a Souls-like game. Because every game with deaths is a Souls-like game. Now, before I really get into the way that this game structures its puzzles, I want to mention the moment that really sold me on the experience. Because when I played this game live on stream, I originally didn't think to be streaming for longer than maybe 3 to 4 hours. Just have a chill stream, check the game out, but in reality it ended up being a 15-hour long stream where I basically ran through the whole game in one session and then did some experiments at the end to try and break the game after. The moment where this game for me went from, oh, this is kind of cool, to, oh, this is going to be quite an experience, isn't it? Was when I reached this tower, the Tower of Quantum Trials. And I think I can say that because I don't really think the name alone spoils anything about the game. This location right here, this tower, is probably the highlight for me through my playthrough, and it's probably going to be the highlight for a lot of other players as well. This is of course partly because of the mechanics that you learn inside of the tower, but what I think is far more crucial is that the tower teaches you this information before you likely have any real use for it. You see, most of the puzzles in this game are fairly linear. despite the solar system being completely open world. There's always the chance that some lucky guy in some lucky playthrough finds or stumbles onto something by accident, prematurely, right? There's always a chance of that when you have a game like this. But if we take the luck factor out of the equation for just a second, all major puzzles in this game are solved quite in a linear fashion. You want to get to the probe tracking module? Well, you need to get to this place. Again, I'm trying to avoid straight up solutions here for people just listening. But knowing how to get to this place can only be learned in this other location. And knowing how to get to that location can only be learned in this location. You see how that kind of works linearly. And of course, it isn't the only path of puzzles you have to complete to figure out about the tracking module. But when it comes to beating the game, the major puzzles are designed like that. And everything else that you find, everything else in the game is just noise, just half clues or just breadcrumbs pointing to the real puzzles. It's sort of the game's way to ensure that players don't just stumble into major giveaways 10 minutes into their playthrough, because the major giveaways are locked behind very certain things you have to do that you can only find out by doing other things first. So now going back to the tower, compared to the probe tracking module, the tower is fairly easy to find. Of course, I'm not going to say how that we find it, but the developers not only placed it on the biggest, most in-your-face planet in the solar system that is literally the first thing you see at the start of every loop, but more importantly, you can also find this place with no prior knowledge about the universe needed. This isn't the end of a trail of puzzles, it's the start. And in fact, as far as I know, there's only one small hint that you could obtain for finding this place, which is using the signal scope after scanning a particular type of rock somewhere in the universe. So yeah, the tower is one of the more easier secret places to find, but despite that, it probably holds some of the game's most clever puzzle mechanics. And again, you're gonna discover all of these mechanics very likely before you have found any real use for it. And that's what makes this place stand out, and that's what makes this moment in almost everybody's playthrough stand out. Most puzzles feel like you're searching for the missing clue, the missing key to open a locked door, and then when you find that key, you can finally go through and advance. This tower, however, it gives you the key, it tells you the solution, you just don't know for which door it is. You don't know how to apply it and in what way. You just know that you have to remember how this all works. The best moment about this tower for me wasn't even the mechanics, even though, you know, mechanics, very cool, again. Very nice mechanics. But the best moment about it was when I dropped down and the game wished me good luck throughout the rest of my journey. Knowing that the information I just learned might apply basically everywhere in the universe and I would just have to keep an open mind about it, that was the best part about it. That's what makes this game and this puzzle in particular really stand out. And again, there's probably going to be somebody in the comments that played the game differently and actually ran into the tower quite late. So there's always going to be a little bit of a difference there. But structurally, when you look at the way that all the puzzles are set up, there will always be a couple of them that hit that same feeling. A couple of puzzles that give away a lot of information before you really need to use that information. And I think that shotgunning some of Outer Wilds' most interesting mechanics was a necessary evil due to the open nature of this game. It really lacks any sort of player direction, especially when you just get started. Somebody just jumping in blind, not knowing it's a puzzle game, I already said this earlier, but he could get lost very easily. So not having these crazy mechanics kind of early on might make it a bit boring or confusing for the players. Maybe they're not going to be interested long enough to get to the bigger picture of it.
I rest my case.
Here's a funny thing as well. Somebody who has completed the game might say in the comments down below that the sun blowing up every 22 minutes is enough of an incentive for players to go out and explore and see why this happens, or maybe even try to prevent it. But I actually disagree, because just to put some things into perspective, on my first playthrough, which was also completely blind, I wasn't aware that the sun was going supernova until the 39th loop, 10 hours and 15 minutes into my playthrough. Technically, I did die to the supernova, a whole lot of times actually, but I often thought that it was something else that killed me, because the giant supernova was never in direct line of sight when it killed me, and even if it was, there was something going on, so I thought that I might have died to something else. The way that I found out about the sun blowing up is actually when I decided to chase this object far out away from the solar system. And then when I would look back at the minimap, I saw that the sun blew up and that I got reset into the loop.
Wait, hold on, what's that? What the fuck? Is that supposed to happen?
And if you think about it like that, this does have some big consequences for my playthrough. I assumed that the main goal of the game was to find and beat all 3 quantum towers. This is where most of the clues that I got seem to be leading me, especially after I got to a tower on a particular place that I will not mention. You know, I carefully inspected this place and I read that I recalled one of the rules, but I still needed to recall 2 more rules. So the next 6 hours of my playthrough, I basically went trying to chase these towers and seeing how I could recall the rules, because it wasn't so much of a stretch to think that the text could actually update. Color me very surprised when I finally figured out everything and that I thought I was going to beat the game, and then it wasn't the end of the game. It was still a pretty interesting part, but all I had done, in fact, was all not even necessary to beat the game. This really put me back to square one and made me wonder if there was even such a thing as an ending. I had to ask my chat to confirm whether or not I had beaten the game yet. In my case though, I would not say that it hurt the experience that much, because I was intrigued enough by the game and the mechanics to explore the rest of the solar system without really needing much of a reason. But that brings me back to the importance of these crazy mechanics being shown kind of early on. Because if the game didn't have all these interesting mechanics, I probably would have lost interest halfway through, knowing I was chasing a thread of puzzles that got me basically nowhere. And in hindsight though, yeah, at this point during my playthrough, the best part of the game was behind me. I had a whole bunch of other clues left over, but I think I'd been to almost every planet multiple times. I had a decent understanding of most of the planets, and with no direction, the game basically resulted into a strategy that I like to call cleaning the ship log. I went to every place in the solar system that still had the text saying there's more to explore here, and I just ended up crossing off all the things. Sometimes even spending an entire loop just to solve one final clue that I had already solved, but I just forgot to read all the things on the stones. I was actually lucky enough that 3 hours into my playthrough, I discovered the meditation mechanic, which they should have just had that in from the start to begin with. There's definitely going to be some people that play through the entirety of Outer Wilds without knowing that's a thing. I definitely think that without this, my whole playthrough would have been a whole lot more frustrating. Anyway, while it felt good to clean up the log to make sure that I hadn't missed anything, this playstyle is actually where the game becomes closest to your typical follow the trail Ubisoft style video game, because instead of exploring and trying to find all the things yourself, you're just running through areas that you've already explored all the way through, clicking on everything just to get that magic ship log updated at the top of your screen, and you just become somewhat more on autopilot until you stumble into something new on accident. It hurt my playthrough quite a bit, and as I was doing this, I just stopped actively thinking about puzzles, and it's actually how I eventually got stuck.
Oh no.
After having collected all the information there was to collect, but I hadn't paid enough attention the whole way through to really put it all together. At the end, I sort of forgot it was a puzzle game and I was just collecting information about the universe. As a result of that, I ended up wasting way more time than I needed to finally put 2 and 2 together and finally beat the game. This is the hint that I overlooked many times. I'm not gonna say it out loud, but when I played it, it just didn't make sense to me, because why would I want to warp to the location that I'm already at? It's easy to say I was just being stupid, and now I'm criticizing the game for being a little dumb. And there's definitely some truth to that, but the one question that I was asking myself all the time when playing this game, when trying to do something or trying to figure something out, is, am I supposed to know how this works yet, or is there still information I need to find? Did I, with my broken, limited vocabulary English, fully understand everything that was on every slide of information, or have I simply not stumbled into the critical information yet required to beat this puzzle? That's what I was thinking about the whole time. And it's a lot harder to shift through all the information trying to come up with solutions for problems if you aren't sure if you're supposed to have solutions yet. Of course, this may not be the case for everybody with everybody's playthrough, especially if you're native American and your English is top class. But it's important to highlight because I also want to talk about the Echoes of the Eye DLC. And with these personal pain points taken in mind, I want to see just how much Echoes of the Eye polished up the experience to get rid of them. Because I haven't really seen anybody talk about this, not in a single YouTube video. But it really upped the level that the game was at even more for me. For instance, let's talk about voice acting. Did I say at the start of the video that the base game, it would have been nice to have some voice acting? Yes, I did. Does Echoes of the Eye have voice acting? No, it doesn't. Has it found a complete workaround for that problem and has it made the overall experience a lot better? Yes, it has. So in the DLC, right, I'm not gonna spoil too much, just like very surface stuff, just like I did with the base game. But in the DLC, we're exploring this spaceship that has been hidden in the solar system since forever. We get to see a glimpse of a new race of aliens that used to live there and their means of communication, which for whatever reason, it wasn't mostly through words, it was through images. So instead of the endless amount of text that we have to read through in the base game, we have slides to look at. And this is something that I felt was just so much better. It was just such an improvement to the game for me. Everything just felt so much more clear. While playing through the DLC, I felt that I always knew what I was supposed to pick up from the information I had found. And what helped even more was the fact that many of the slides that you pick up are too damaged to see, so you only get to see a slice of the information. So whereas in the base game, you would have to pick up tiny pieces of information through conversations that the alien race had with each other. But here, you just get to see a little bit of information, and then the information that's blocked off, you still have to look for. So this way, I also knew that there was still a lot of information missing regarding to the problem that I was solving. So when I finally found the slides that were not burned, I knew I had all the information that I needed. And this really homed down on that eureka moment, the eureka moments that you have in these type of games. I don't know what else to call them. In the base game, I sometimes had to read text and conversations a couple of times to really make sure I got the full picture. With these slides, it was crystal clear exactly what information or clue I just discovered. And the developers not only knew that this was an improvement, they also played into this perfectly with the music. There are a lot of moments where you're going through the slides, you're just watching the information play out, and then the moment you get to the critical slide, the missing piece of information you still needed, the music changes. It gets more intense, or it pitches up or down, or it gets something with the music. It makes it so that the discoveries that you make hit that much harder compared to the base game, where in the base game there are different music tracks for different environments, and that worked, don't get me wrong. If you're on this particular station going through a particular type of information, having that particular music, it's nice, it's really nice, but it never as much hits the mark as it does in the DLC, because the developers have no way of precisely syncing the music the exact moment that the player gets the solution that he's been looking for. And this also affects the DLC in so many other ways. Let's talk, for example, about the ship's log. As far as the DLC goes, people that have played it know that the ship log is pretty much useless in almost every single way. I'm pretty sure it was done intentionally, because in a DLC you will not actually be using your spaceship that much. You're basically using it to get from your starting planet to the alien spaceship, and that's it. And I really wish the developers had found a better solution to just get you to the spaceship at the start of every loop, but hey, it is what it is. But as far as the amount of ship logs go and the amount of information they contain, it's pretty much dialed back down to zero. To give you a more concrete example, this is an image of a nearly 100% playthrough where all of the information in the universe is found, from the base game and from the DLC. These blue ones, they're for the DLC, and everything else in all the different colors, they're all for the base game. So by just looking at this, you would say that the DLC has about 25% of the content of the base game. But that's not really true, because if we look at the average playtime, the time it takes for players to beat this game, it seems that it still takes the average player 10 hours to beat the DLC instead of 15 hours for the base game. 10 hours is less than 15 hours for sure. The DLC isn't as big as the base game, but it puts into perspective just how much less handholding there is in the DLC with the ship logs. This too had a rather big effect on gameplay for me. In the base game, I already mentioned, I would constantly just go through different places and use the ship log updated pop-up to figure out when I had discovered something new, and then I would just go to the ship log to get the short story of it, right? That strategy does not work in the DLC. In the DLC, I could find a major clue or a story beat, and then I would go to the ship log to just get the information, and it just would not care. It would only mention that I had found a slide reel instead of repeating and spoon-feeding me the information that was actually on the slide reel. And I think the developers could only do this because they knew that the slide reels were much more clear to most players than a wall of text that the players had to read through. Something that I also felt was an interesting change of pace was the fact that the whole DLC is just in this one location. Hearing that might be a little bit off-putting to some of you after having experienced the freedom to travel around the whole solar system in the base game. But for me, this made the solutions to the puzzles all the more of a mind blow. Because every time you discover something new in the DLC, you discover a small thing that was there all along, just right under your nose. You just never took the right steps to discover it. And while that's somewhat true for the base game as well, it's more likely that in the base game you get to a location to discover how to get to another location, to discover how to get to another location. But in the DLC, everything is a hidden passage inside of a hidden passage inside of a hidden passage. And somehow, some way, I actually found that more enticing and more exciting to play through than the base game. It just proves to me that it's not always about size, it's what you do with it. And that's what Danny keeps telling me as well. One more thing I also wanted to say is that I found it really ballsy. I found it a really ballsy move from the developers to hide one of the 3 main secrets in the DLC in putting down an essential item and walking away from it. That's how you solve the puzzle. At any point in my playthrough of the DLC, I could have done that and solved it by myself without getting any clues or any information. But due to the excellent game design, I never put down said item and simply walked 10 meters away from it. And yes, I can confidently say that that is good game design and not just me being dumb again. This essential item in a certain place are essentially your eyes. It's how you see, it's how you move around, it's how you interact with the environment. Everything in this game tells the player you need this item in order to do anything. And the game does it in such a convincing manner that simply putting that item down is not something that you will naturally try. And the developers were so confident that you wouldn't do that, they put 1/3 of the DLC's puzzle mechanics on the fact that you don't do that. My only real complaint is that for all the solid puzzles that the DLC has, the ending was a little bit unsatisfying. Long before I actually managed to open the cage and go inside, I already knew what was inside, so the encounter was not that much of a surprise. The ending of the base game was, in my opinion, so complicated and so over the top, all over the place, but at the same time so satisfying and crazy. I was sort of expecting the ending of the DLC to be similar to that, but instead the ending felt more like finally recalling all of the 3 rules we talked about earlier. You broke the 3 seals, good job. You recalled the 3 rules, good job. You get to do something very similar in both games actually. I'm really trying to avoid spoilers here. And then the game just goes on. I was just confused. After this, I again was not sure whether I had beaten the game or not. And I actually assumed that I didn't, so I kept playing until realizing, hey, I guess that was the ending. I was just sure that besides the cage, there was another trail of puzzles that I had to follow. Something with the electrical wires in the water, something with the ship going away from the supernova, something with this thing right here that I will not mention. I thought I maybe had to get on the raft and ride a certain wave to get on top of like a special place or something, but none of that ended up being true. I had actually beaten the game and I was a little bit disappointed. It was a little bit of a disappointment on top of an otherwise excellent experience. So yeah, that's Outer Wilds. That's what I wanted to say about Outer Wilds. This is where I would have wanted to end the video, but going through a lot of articles online and going through a lot of videos, it seemed that the horror side of the DLC is a big topic for a lot of players. Again, I really don't want to spoil too much through the audio. You either know what I'm talking about or you don't know. But all I want to say is that I very strongly disagree with what most reviewers say about the horror parts of this game and how it's straying too far from the rest and how it doesn't belong in Outer Wilds.
These bits are so unlike the rest of Outer Wilds that they feel almost like an entirely different game.
But well, first of all, I don't really think it's that scary. It's very far from a horror experience if you're watching this and you're hesitating to get into it. But also, is it just me, or has Outer Wilds always had a little bit of a fear factor to it? Like when you first try to enter Giant's Deep, for example. As I went into it, I was thinking about Jupiter in real life. And I was thinking I would almost certainly die going into it. There was a little bit of unease trying to land on that planet, I guess. And the same could really be said for navigating a particular underground city because there is a fear of the unknown. And that we all forget about these things. In my opinion, Outer Wilds has always had its scary moments or its moments of unease. It is after a couple of loops, when you finally have the full picture, that unease and that fear mostly goes away. And honestly, it works the same way in the DLC for me. The first time, yeah, it can give you a little bit of a jump scare maybe, because you either weren't expecting it or you're going through the unknown. But once you figure out the mechanics of how to actually get through this part of the game, it really is a breeze. And every scary moment can be avoided if you just figure out how the world works. Sort of like a puzzle. Wow. Crazy. And you don't even die if you fail. You can literally get a second or a third chance right away in a single run, which is a lot more forgiving than the base game had. So yeah, that's it. That's the Outer Wilds video I've been wanting to make for so long. Now I can sleep again at night without thinking about how I would make this video. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. You'll see me again next week. Probably. Goodbye.